My name is Alice. I'm an independent journalist currently based in Beijing, and I just completed a project funded by the Pulitzer Center on Islam with Chinese characteristics. There are two main Muslim ethnic groups in China, the Hui and the Uyghur, but also a series of smaller groups. I looked at who they were, I looked at the policy treating them, but I also wanted to look at questions of identity, of how these communities interact with the state, how the state interacts with them, how that varies from region to region, how that varies between ethnic groups, how that varies in the context of recent extremist attacks. And the questions I wanted to answer were questions about Islam, questions about China, but also broader questions about how state and religion can coexist, especially in a time when nationalism is on the rise. There's a huge variance in how religion is treated and in the amount of space that people are given to live out their religious beliefs and practices in different parts of China, in different levels of society, at different times, depending on what the economic and political and social situations are. In regards to Islam, in places like northwestern China, in Gansu and Ningxia, there was so much freedom and so much life in terms of how Hui Islam was growing and thriving and actually becoming more and more fragmented because new sects keep starting. And people are actively trying to interpret and understand their faith. Throughout the ages, there have been Hui reformers who traveled to the Middle East, often to Saudi Arabia, or maybe to Syria, to Yemen, to Cairo. They would study at places like Al-Azhar. They would come back and they would say, we need to reform Islam. Chinese Islam is corrupt. It has too many strands of Taoism, Buddhism, Confucianism in it, and we need to become more pure and become more Islamic the way that Islam was supposed to be. At the same time, you had other Chinese Muslims who would intentionally blend Chinese thinking with Islam and try to interpret the Quran, for example, or the Quran and Hadith in a way that it would match with Confucian teachings. Among the Hui, they would often tell me that there's no contradiction between being a good Chinese citizen and a good Muslim. And even people who are party members would tell me this. They would say there is a certain flexibility in our beliefs and in our political commitments. In places like Xinjiang, the narratives also cannot be simplified. It's true that religious control is a lot tighter and that there's overbearing state security and discriminatory practices. At the same time, it doesn't mean that every Uyghur in Xinjiang wants independence and wants to be in their own country. Nor does it mean that every person in Xinjiang is happy and has their life better from economic growth, as the state media would have us believe. There's a wide discrepancy even between northern and southern Xinjiang, and then between the rural areas and the cities, as always in China. We can see from both top-down and from bottom-up how different kinds of state treatment lead to more peaceful coexistence with minority groups, or how different kinds of ideological accommodation or compromise on the part of the minorities themselves leads to less conflict. On the flip side, we also see how lack of understanding or use of overbearing security measures or ethnic discrimination can exacerbate problems and actually lead to more vulnerability to extremist narratives and extremist violence. It's important to me personally because we are living in an age of increased nationalism, and it seems, not just in China, but also in Europe, in the US, and across the world, that many societies are struggling with identity questions, with questions of what it means to be a citizen of a certain country, whether that is ethnically based or whether it can or should be inclusive of certain religions or certain groups that are different from us. That's why I think this story is relevant and hopefully will be instructive and helpful to not only those who focus on Islam and on China, but to everyone who's wrestling with questions of identity, of state and religion, of nationalism and inclusion in this day and age.